Welcome to the Legacy Leaders Podcast. Are you doing the best for your client to help them create their legacy? Are you creating a plan that goes far beyond finances to help people ensure that it becomes the driving force behind all decisions? On this podcast, hosts Katie Beth Hand and Stan Miller will help you with growing your practice and your clients' peace of mind. Together, they bring the best and brightest minds to share with you how to help your clients develop their best legacy. And now, here are your hosts, Katie Beth and Stan.
Welcome back to the Legacy Leaders Podcast with your hosts, Stan Miller and Katie Beth Hand. Our guest today is the Chief Ignition Officer at Gusto Now, Dr. Alise Cortez. Alise, thank you so much for joining us. We are really excited to have you with us today.
Thank you, Katie Beth. It's great to be on the other end of the mic. Thank you for having me.
It is always nice to get to be the interviewee every once in a while. So tell our audience a little bit about, if you can, your background, which is very interesting. You've done a lot of interesting, unique things. So give us just the bird's eye view of your background, and then tell us a little bit about the work that you do now.
Okay. So I've really been in what I would call the human capital space for a little bit over 25 years. And I started off in recruiting and just found my way naturally, organically into learning and development, and then employee engagement, improvement, and leadership development, organizational development, et cetera. And then really just naturally, the divining rod led me from my research in meaning and work and identity. I started hosting my podcast, Working on Purpose, and I found my sweet spot in the realm of meaning and purpose. And so that's really what I'm doing today, is helping organizations to activate meaning and purpose in their cultures and their leadership. So I have various ways that I do that. And a fun story to tell that helps color that. Why is it that my company is called Gusto Now, and why do I feel such a need to inject inspiration and zest into organizations? One, because they need it, but two, I had the amazing experience, Stan and Katie Beth, in my mid-20s when I got to live in Spain and Brazil for a total of 3 years. So I learned Spanish. The Spaniards really taught me about relationships. When you go to Spain, everywhere people are kissing. There's connection happening. I mean, as an American, I was like, I hadn't seen that very much. And then the Brazilians taught me about communication. You really can't have a conversation with Brazilians without touching them. And so they taught me a lot about that. And those cultures really grew me, augmented me, transformed me. And then, of course, I married a Costa Rican, and that's why my name is Cortez. So those cultures really colored how I think about life and playing and dancing and the enthusiasm, the exuberance. And that's why I call my company Gusto Now, because it means the same thing in English, Spanish, and Portuguese, which is that enthusiasm, that persistence, that zest.
I love that. That is really cool. One thing you'll know about us, and if you listen to the podcast regularly for our listeners, Stan and I are huge advocates of travel. So I love that you got a little plug for travel in there. There is just something about, and Stan and I could each tell you 100 stories about this, but there's just something about getting immersed in a different culture and the way it shapes you and shapes your worldview. And really, I mean, it changed your life. Clearly. And so I love that you did a quick plug for travel in there. We always encourage our listeners to travel and really immerse themselves with other cultures. But I think that is so interesting. I love this idea of human capital, the greatest resource that there is. And I love that you had such a long and distinguished career of using human capital and helping people find kind of their right fit, right passion for so many years. I know that you have written several books about on this topic, Purpose Ignited and Passionately Striving in Why. There are a lot of great books that you've written. Tell us a little bit about each of your books and what our readers can expect from those.
So absolutely love this question. I will first confess this to you, since maybe nobody is listening to this. Author sat on my resolution list for years before it actually happened, right? I aspired for this for so long. And then finally, the first book, Purpose Ignited, came out in 2020. And at the time, what I was trying to do at that moment was I was trying to take all the things I learned from my podcast and pour them into one book. And so it was ridiculous and over the top. And my publisher was like, yep, cut it in half and get back to me. So what it really got distilled down to is it's really my opportunity to help readers awaken to their passion and purpose and start them down the path of becoming an inspirational leader. So everybody needs inspiration, as we were talking about before we got on air. And you need first to learn how to turn yourself on before you can actually inspire others. So that's what that book is about. Along the way, I had a publisher friend who said, hey, Alise, I want to release a series of anthologies. and I want to focus one on women. I would love for you to curate it. I don't care what the topic is. And I said, it's easy. The topic will be purpose. And so what I did was I talked to my dear friend, LinkedIn, and together we came up with a plan to find women from around the world, from Australia to Zambia, to share their very intimate story of how they discovered their purpose and how they're serving from it today. And it's categorized by their paths to purpose. So it's very inspiring. It really helps the readers go, oh, this could be me. I could do something like this. Let's see. Then the next book really was a book. It's called Coloring Life: How Loss Invites Us to Live More Vibrant Lives. And that book is really my share of losing both of my parents 28 days apart in January of 2019. It's a front row seat of what that was actually like. You were with me all the way. And then the second part of the book are 7 whispers of wisdom that I learned about living because of that experience. And then the last book that came out is The Great Revitalization: How Activating Meaning and Purpose Can Radically Enliven Your Business. And that really showcases a lot of the thought and the work that I do today to help organizations create that culture of gusto. And I wrote it to help the readers understand today's workforce needs and wants. And then I provide the second half of the book, are 22 best practices to help them create that in terms of embedding that into their own culture to give those people what they want in the way of the work experience. And I have one more coming out as well. It's called The Power of Soulful Healing. That's coming out in March. The name, as you would imagine, is really about helping people to start to heal their own wounds. Every single human being never gets out of this experience without some wounds. So learning how to be able to identify them and address them is important. It's co-written with a clinical psychologist. I'm an organizational psychologist and logotherapist. I thought you were going to ask me about that title there, Stan, but it's a total deep.
Well, I haven't gotten to that yet.
Okay, it's coming. It's coming. Okay.
Yeah.
That's the deep dive or the light version of what the subject or the content is for that one.
That's great. All of those are ones that sound so interesting to me. I'm headed out to add all of those to my cart as we speak. That
Yep.
speaks a lot to the work that Stan and I do as well, and the belief systems we hold as well. So, okay, I'm going to hush for a minute while I add books to my cart. Stan, you take a moment and you can ask Dr. Cortez your questions.
Yeah. So my own observation is that not that many organizations are empowered by a really authentic purpose. And a lot of people who work in organizations are not empowered by a really authentic purpose. And so we don't have a lot of time here. And I know you've written all these books on this, but I'm wondering if there's a way that we could, in this like brief time we have together, if you could give us just some clues about what process could a business owner take to open the door to team members to empower them to find their purpose? How much does that relate to the business owner or the business manager? How much does it relate to that person finding their purpose in the business? How do you, if you got hired as a consultant, which I'm guessing you do from time to time, right? Businesses would hire you to come in and say, help us get clarity around our purpose and ignite that in our team. What's the, what's the short answer to how you do that?
It's a delicious, yummy question, Stan. And yes, I get hired to do that. I love doing that with organizations. So quickly, just like I'm going to give you a framework here. When I go into work with organizations, the first thing we do, we have to really first detect and articulate the purpose of the organization first. Every organization has a purpose, but you have to actually articulate it. And that does involve enrolling all of the employees because they're living it day to day. You might need to still be informed by whoever founded it or whoever's ever running it, but you do that together in what I call a wild alive scratching process to, come to a way to say this thing in a way that really lands with everyone. And then from there, you start embedding it into the organizational practices. How do you start your meetings? Do you say something about the people that you're helping? So purpose is always about what are you doing that's helping whoever it is you're serving. And then from there, there's some really interesting things that you can do that are, I would say, the best companies, the most forward-thinking organizations are doing this, where they are really measuring on a regular basis how the experience of purpose is lived in an organization. So the first way, it's just a simple 3 questions. And they ask their employees on a regular basis, to what extent are our managers living the purpose of this organization in the day-to-day? It's just simple, it might be a 1 to 7 score. And then the second question, which is important to what you said earlier, is to what extent do you, the employee, feel that the purpose of this organization aligns with your values? Now we're starting to get close to their own purpose, but it's still values.
Right.
Now it's personal. Now that's where we get to the emotional, sticky, motivational part of it. And then the last question is, to what extent do you see your colleagues living the purpose of this organization on a day-to-day basis? Now we know how that's being perceived all around them. Those simple measurements will help you understand kind of where you need to shore up how purpose is experienced, how you can reinforce it. And then the better companies, Stan and Katie Beth, are actually giving their people an opportunity to start really diving into their own purpose. And I can give you one really powerful example if you want me to of what.
At least
That'd
one,
be
yeah,
great.
and maybe more.
Okay. So I want to give credit where I learned about this. Dr. Carlos Jorge was on my podcast some time ago, and I learned about this in one of his books. He, and I should have known this because once upon a time, to your point, Katie Beth, in one of my other previous lives, I used to sell baking flour by the trainload and truckload to bakeries and noodle makers in California a long time ago, before I got into the human capital space. And I knew of the company Bimbo. They're a Mexican baking organization, and they have a presence in 33 countries around the world, obviously, and they have about 130,000 employees. And part of what they do in that organization that just wows me and so inspires me is they have whenever anybody starts new in the organization, those new people go through an onboarding process and program that helps them start to learn and articulate their own purpose and then discover how to align it with and through that of the overall organization, because the original founder understood that their company, was made up of the collective souls of the organization, and therefore those individual collective souls need to be connected to their own purpose. Isn't that cool?
Yeah.
Pretty cool. Yeah.
Yeah, transformational for sure. Just such a unique way of thinking about just human capital in general and company culture and where that comes from. Tell us another kind of positive story like that, some successes that you've had working with different leaders or working with different companies.
Yeah, there's a couple of things maybe I would bring up here. So many to think about and choose from and examples on the road. But one company that I got to work with a few years ago, they're a sustainability consultancy company, small company. They had at the time, I think, 40 people. And I met them when they had literally just the year prior or the year and a half prior, they'd been on the Best Places to Work company in Dallas. And when I met them, they were having all kinds of trouble because they couldn't keep people. People were not engaged. They couldn't backfill managers who had left because people didn't want to come to work for the company. And they were starting to get some major complaints from their customers who were like, hey, where's the service level here? Things were really slipping. So I met with the founder and her two VPs on a Friday afternoon, and she said, can you start on Monday? And I said, no, but I can start Tuesday. So what we did for them was just what I told you before, is we went in and we helped them to detect and articulate their purpose together as a whole team, which was incredibly invigorating for them to enroll them in that process. And then we started to thread it into the way they did their meetings, how they recognized people, and how they started to tell stories about their customers and such. We then also went in and developed their managers. I have a program called Managing Through Meaning, where you teach people how to be able to connect with the team in a meaningful way that helps them see that they matter, as well as, growing them in their careers. So we took the managers through that process. We built their teams around strengths as well. And of course, the leaders went through the inspirational leadership program that really helped them, cast that bigger vision in a way that people could relate to. And the long and short of it was, not only did they completely turn the whole ship around, they grew their employee base and their customer base by 1.5 in just the year that I was working with them. It's such a great thing to do, and it wasn't that hard. It wasn't a big heavy lift. It wasn't that big of an investment. And ultimately, what happened was that organization then the next year was acquired by another organization. And not that's what they were out to do, but it was just beautifully positioned for them to do that. And the founder made a big boatload of money. So for all of these people that are listening that are in financial services or CPAs or estate planning attorneys, and so many ways to be able to inculcate purpose in your everyday work in a way that really magnetizes people to you, all of your stakeholders to you. But most organizations are not doing this well.
I don't want our listeners to, when they hear what we're talking about here, to think this is some kind of airy fairy thing, just a feel good thing. What you're doing here is you're connecting this to the performance of the business success, the profitability of the business, reducing employee turnover, increasing employee productivity, all of those things, right? This is not just some kind of warm fuzzy thing that people do because it sounds good.
Correct. Yeah. In fact, there's lots of research out there, including that of Raj Sisodia, who's the co-founder of the Global Conscious Capitalism movement, who show that purpose-driven organizations outperform their peers by a factor of as much as 15 to 1. So purpose-driven organizations are attractive to investors because of those very reasons. And also
What can you say? Yeah, I'm sorry, go ahead.
And also because, what happens, they're attractive because their employees also persevere more deeply to be able to realize that organizational mission and the objectives because of that strong, sticky motivational factor to it.
What's your observation about how this impacts hiring, attracting the talent you want?
Oh, I want to tell another sort of example around that. So I had the pleasure of having Hugh Welsh on my podcast several years ago. I'd met him on a panel. He was and maybe still is the president and general counsel of a company called DSM. And they used to be called Dutch State Mining when they started 160 years ago, and they've repurposed themselves and they do all kinds of things now, including pharmaceuticals, their big thing now. But they've really built their business around the world, and they've repurposed their tagline DSM to stand for Do Something That Matters. So they literally have people drawn to them because they are doing something that betters the world, and they situate themselves. They help clean up plastic in the ocean, and they do all these things that people and organizations find valuable and meaningful. And so that becomes a magnetizing draw that people are actually, reaching to say, I want to work for that company. In fact, when I released the episode, I had people reaching out to me saying, can you somehow connect me? I want to work for that company. They've been on my radar for years. So that's exactly what you want, Stan and Katie Beth, is you want to be able to socialize your purpose in a way that people know you stand for something that is worth being a part of and that's enticing, right? That's your talent attractor. And so what I'm out to do is help people create what I call a destination workplace. And that's a place that is that striving, magnetizing beacon call where people feel like they're home, they're growing and realizing their potential, and they don't want to leave because of it.
So if we hired you to do that for our organization, or anybody hired you to do that for their organization, what's the process? What's the time frame? And I mean, in terms of access, affordability, is what you do accessible to pretty much any business, or do you have to be, 1,000 employees to make this practical?
No, I mean, like I was saying, working with this consultancy, a sustainability consultancy, they were 40 employees when I started working with them. I've worked with organizations that had, say, a doctor's practice, they had 8 employees. So, it really depends on how deeply we want to go with this. But if we want to just simply start with the process of let's articulate your purpose and start to thread it into your culture, and then train your managers to be able to embrace this way of relating to people, growing people, encouraging people, et cetera. If we just do that, let's just say it's a company of 10 people, just to say that. Right. So we could probably do that process pretty quickly within 3 months. We could move the needle pretty strongly on that, and perhaps even a little bit less. That was what I did with the doctor's practice, was 3 months. And if we're going to start looking at how do we actually develop this and bring it into a bigger organization, let's say it's 50 or 100 or whatever, that takes a little bit longer because you've got a few layers that you want to be able to train. But, for like a 10-person company like that, for that 3-month process, it could be something as little as like $25,000.
Yeah, so do you do it virtually? Do you come on site? Some combination? What's the process look like?
We can do it all virtually. Certainly, we learned all that a few years ago, but I like a combination if possible. But it isn't necessary for me to be there if, there are budget constraints or we're trying to work on some kind of a timeline. But yeah, nothing beats, the human physical 3D form, right?
Yep. Sure. Oh, yeah. Agree with that.
For sure. Before we run out of time, I also wanted to ask you just a little bit and you alluded to this earlier in the podcast, but you're a podcast host as well. So before we run out of time, tell us just a little bit about the Working on Purpose podcast. From our previous conversation, I think I can guess what it's about, but go ahead and tell our listeners a little bit more specifically about the focus of the podcast.
Yeah, it's evolved a lot over the 10 years that I've been hosting it. But what it's really come to today is a thought leadership platform that advances the conversation on creating those destination workplaces. So I generally bring on authors And the reason for that is because selfishly, I want to learn and grow from their own books. So I read the books cover to cover. Each week, I take about 25 pages of typewritten notes, and that becomes research for my books and my speaking. And then when I have them come on, then we talk about, it's just under an hour, we talk about aspects from the book. So that podcast, and now I write a newsletter on LinkedIn about it as well. So now people can actually get like the short little applications of that, whatever we talked about on the podcast the next week. So it really has become like this way to help create a community of people who care about creating this place where we can actually enjoy more of these destination workplaces where people are fueled, we do business that betters the world, and the owners and founders have the impact that they actually really crave.
Very cool. Very cool. Okay, Stan, what questions do you have left? And I know there's too many to capture in the time that we have left, but I can see them brewing.
No, I have tons of questions, but they're granular and probably this is not the right venue for my questions. I need to buy the books and read the books and then have another conversation to drill in because there's so much here. And I know, and I'll just say from my own experience, I know that I like my work a lot better when I'm coming from a place of purpose. I'm not just robotically coming to the office and doing stuff. And I just believe I know that is true when I look in the faces of my own team members here. When they're operating out of purpose, it is an entirely different experience for them. And I don't have to worry about things like motivation. Are they really doing their job? Do I have to have systems and processes to make sure they're really doing their job? I can see it. I know they are just from the energy and the body language in it. And so it's just to me, this is so obvious. There's so many benefits to having an empowered team that does come from clarity of purpose. But yeah, so I need to learn more about how to do that myself for sure. And I'm going to order those books myself so I don't have to share them with you, Katie Beth.
I'm probably going to download mine on my Kindle. So yeah, you're on your own, Stan. No, I agree exactly with what you're saying. And this has been such a great conversation because this idea of building a company and really focusing on purpose, to me, purpose creates that passion. And that passion can change the culture and the feel of your office because passion really creates that perseverance because then it's not just a job, it's really a mission. And so when it's a tough day at the office, when the business deal doesn't go through like you thought it would, when those hard knocks come, and they do to all of us in any field that we're in, when that happens, when you really do have this purpose that you're talking about, Dr. Cortez, that I feel like it just completely changes how we react to those things and the patience that we carry for those things happening and really allows us to refocus and get back to getting the work done. So I can't wait to read the books and listen to the podcast. I have added that to my list as well. I'm an avid podcast listener. So I guess that's all the questions I have for you. Do you have anything else that you would like our listeners to know before we sign off?
Yeah, one way to close, since I know who the audience is here, is you just might be interested in just the performance measures of inspired employees. So people that are working with that sense of purpose are generally inspired. And this came out from Bain Consulting several years ago, and they looked at 300 different companies, and this is how they derived these measures. But what they did was they said, let's look at the performance of these different layers of people. So we have disengaged people altogether, and then we have satisfied employees, engaged, and inspired employees. And so if we put the benchmark of this satisfied employee at a productivity level of 100, then the engaged worker is 144 and the inspired worker is 225. So what that means is it takes 2.25 satisfied employees to do the work of one inspired human. It's worth the investment. Yeah.
Absolutely. It is worth the investment. Well, for all of our listeners, we want to thank you for listening to the Legacy Leaders podcast with your host, Stan Miller and Katie Beth Hand. And our guest today was Dr. Alise Cortez. And to learn more about Alise and get connected with her, you can visit gustonow.com. That's gusto-now.com. We'll also link it for you in the show notes. You can also find Dr. Cortez on her podcast. Also, you can find her on LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube. So anywhere you want to go to find her, she is there waiting for you. We will link all of those things for you in the show notes so you can get connected easily. And Dr. Cortez, thank you again so much for joining us today and jumping on the call. We really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. It was a delight. You two are a fantastic duo.
You've been listening to the Legacy Leaders Podcast with Katie Beth Hand and Stan Miller. For more information on them and the show, please visit pinnaclelegacylaw.com. If you like what you've learned today, do share the program with your friends and subscribe wherever podcasts are found.
49 faces looked to him in triumph. Over the last 12 months, they had each taken turns and promoted his business for a week at a time, driving over $987,342 in revenue. What if you had a network of 50 centers of influence who promoted your business every week for a year? Grab your copy of the #1 Amazon best-selling book, The Ultimate Guide to Growing Your Business with a Podcast, at 33% off the Amazon price by going to ultimatepodcastbook.com. Again, that website for 33% off the Amazon price is ultimatepodcastbook.com.